In this section of our algebra book, we're going to be learning about relative frequency graphs. And on your test, we're going to cover underneath one learning target, we're going to cover creating and interpreting relative frequency graphs. So you're going to have to actually be able to create a relative frequency graph as well as look at one and interpret the answers to some questions. So first, let's just define what a relative frequency graph is. This is either a bar graph or a circle graph that summarizes data into categories. Okay, so for example, if I was looking at a class of students and I was saying who has blue eyes, who has green eyes, who has brown, and other. Okay, let's say there was 5, 2, 15, and 1. Okay, so basically these are my different categories, and I can either take a circle graph and I can kind of figure out how much in each category there, or I can make a bar graph as well where I've got the different categories: blue, green, brown, or other. And then the only thing that makes it a relative frequency graph instead of a regular bar or circle graph or a regular bar graph is that each category is assigned a fraction or a percent of the whole. So I would need to add all this up. That would tell me 23 students total in the class, and I would actually have percent be my other axis, percent or fraction, okay? And obviously it's going to go all the way up to 100%. That would be maybe if you had everybody had one colored, like let's say everybody had brown eyes, then you would just make one bar up to 100. But in this case, we have different amounts. So let's say we were going to graph green. So that's 2 out of 23. So what I would do is I'd take 2 divided by 23 to tell me 0.0869, that's my decimal, times that by 100 to give me a percent. That's 8.69%. So I would make a bar that showed about what I thought would be 8%. Okay, probably a little bit lower than that even for green eyes. Okay, so that's what a relative frequency graph is, and we're going to look at a more complicated example of how to do that. But basically the main thing is that it's organized by categories and usually percents, sometimes fractions. Okay, so we're going to use this example of the library collection. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a relative frequency graph of the library's collection. We're going to do a bar graph first, and then I'll show you a circle graph. So the first thing you need to do is convert each of these numbers into a percent of the total. And what I would do, what I would suggest doing, let's just use the other category, this is going to be our smallest one, is I would just divide by the total. To convert to a percent, I would just divide by the total and then take my answer times 100. So we're going to do 5766 divided by 199659. That'll give me 0.0288, which means that I've got 2.88% in other. So out of this library collection, about 2.88% is not one of these categories. It's in an other category. And you would go ahead and just do this for all of these categories, and then basically what you would do is you would create a graph where you had all of the categories along the bottom and then the percent along the side, and you would graph. So other, you can see it's at about 2.8%. Children's fiction is a little bit underneath 20%, so if we were to calculate that out, that's what we should get. Okay, so we would do the percents and we would just make a bar on each one. Okay, all right, so that's a good example of a bar graph. Make sure you get that copied down into your notes. The other thing is that sometimes the percents are put into a circle graph, and I just want to cover really quickly. I know that you guys have done circle graphs before, but when you do a pie chart or a circle graph, you're going to calculate all the percents, but you can't just estimate what that section is going to be. So when you look over here, this is going to be the number of degrees. So the angle degree of this section of the pie is 65 degrees, and that's because children's fiction should be 18% of the pie, and a circle graph has 360 degrees. So when we do, when we want to find out that, we're going to take 0.18 times 360. which gives me my 64.8, which they rounded up to 65 degrees. So that tells you how many degrees each section should be. You're just going to take the percent of the whole number of degrees in a circle to help you figure out how big each section should be. Okay, we can also go back and talk about probabilities. If you have to select something at random from a library, what are the chances that the book is each of these things? We're just going to use the percents because selecting something at random, percent of the whole is going to tell us the probability for this type of thing. So if I am looking at the whole, adult fiction is 35%, so your chances are 35 out of 100, which I can reduce to 7 out of 20 chances, or you could write it. Remember, back from the unit you did in 7th grade, you can use a fraction. You can use a decimal, or you can use a percent for each of these, okay? So this is the chance that you will select adult fiction, 7 out of 20 or 35% chance of selecting adult fiction if you select something at random. Media, we would just go ahead and go back to our percent, 6%, so that would be 6 out of 100, which reduces to 3 out of 50, or 0.06, or 6%, okay? And so on and so forth for each one, okay? The probability of selecting any children's book, let's look at that for just 1 second. Any children's book, so let's just look at children's fiction and children's nonfiction. So we would just add those together because they're going to make up a total of the sum of the two of these percents of the library. So if we add those together, that gives us 32. I believe. And so our percent of choosing any children's book will be 32%, okay, or 32 out of 100, which I can reduce to, let's see, divide by 4, maybe, 8/25, yep, 8/25 or 0.32 as your probability for any children's book. Any type of book you would just calculate everything other than media and other. So I could take 6% and 3% and I would know that that's a total of 9% is not a book. So 9% is not a book. And so when I look here, that means that the probability of selecting any type of book would be 100% of all of the types of things you could choose, minus the 9% that aren't books. That would give me 91% chance of choosing any type of book, or 0.91, or 91 out of 100. All right, what I want you to do on this one, I've made this table a little bit bigger than it is in your notes in case you can't see it. These are the number colored candies, so think of M&Ms. These are the numbers of each color that she got in her package. So I just want you to go ahead and construct a relative frequency bar graph to go with this. I'm going to check this when you come to class tomorrow, so make sure that you have it ready to go at the beginning of class.